Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we have Bob Gorman with us in conversation about poverty in the North Country. Bob is the executive director of the United Way of Northern New York. So what you do, Bob, has a lot of, you know a lot about what's going on in the North Country. You have your fingers in a lot of charitable pies. Why don't you start out by giving folks a little information about yourself, your background, and how you came to be with the United Way?
All right, well, in Watertown they know this story a little bit more, but so I was in journalism for 39 years. Didn't work out, and so I started looking for something else to do, and actually I retired from that career, but wanted to stay in the North Country. And at that time, the executive director of the United Way, Jane Graves, who'd been there for 26 years, was retiring. And I was looking at what the job entailed, which was in many ways working with 3 counties. And I'm not going to say I know everybody in every county and all that, but I do know where Rensselaer Falls is, and I know where Croghan is, and so I had a little more familiarity with those communities from the newspaper standpoint. And as I have always talked to people, many of us in Watertown see us as a region rather than every crossroads for themselves. And that's a battle that we all face in how much cooperation do we do and how much do we work together. I was talking to somebody, well actually I mentioned this to the college presidents up here. People in Jefferson County tend to pay much more attention to St. Lawrence County than the other way around. Most people in St. Lawrence County don't wake up ever thinking about Jefferson County, but in Jefferson County people talk about St. Lawrence County all the time because so many people went to college up here.
That's right.
And people forget about that. So at the Watertown Daily Times, I was an editor there for 19 years, people in Jefferson County would read St. Lawrence County news. They're scanning headlines to see Canton and Potsdam in particular, because if it's a business or the colleges, they're looking at say, oh yeah, I've been to Maxwell's, I've been to all these different places, and so
it's more than just hockey scores.
And yet at the Watertown Rotary Club once a year, somebody's going to stand up and say, and in hockey news, Clarkson beat St. Lawrence beat Clarkson, whatever, and then there's cheering and booing.
Right.
So here we are in Watertown, actually paying attention to the what's going on up here.
Right. Well, and one of the things we know is that if we try to tackle our challenges and our problems as individual communities, we're not going to get very far. So when we use the power of the region and we look at solutions that are based on a little bit larger than just the community or even the county's size, we're going to have more success, because regionally we have a lot more resources to draw on than we do in each little burg.
And from a United Way perspective, we work with all these nonprofit in the North Country, and what's happened in the nonprofit community is that there is what's happening are people trying to make sure a service exists, but all the background stuff, where the books are done, where the audits occurs, all that doesn't matter where that happens.
Right.
For services to continue to grow and expand in the North Country, there needs to be more cooperation. And rather than everybody guarding their turf and everybody fighting for grants on their own, there is more of an effort going on to cooperate and collaborate. But what's happening in St. Lawrence and Lewis County are seeing this. A lot of the nonprofits are headquartered now in Watertown.
Mm-hmm. No more regionalization of a lot of them.
And there's a little more power in doing that. So the Children's Home of Jefferson County provides most of the service for foster care in St. Lawrence County. So the county contracts with them. Another nonprofit, actually one that was created by the United Way in the early 90s, was Volunteer Transportation Center. Mm-hmm. So they've been in Watertown and serving Jefferson County all these years, and have been in Lewis County for years. They quietly opened their office in Canton a couple of years ago, and the reason I say quietly, they don't have enough volunteer drivers yet. They're building that base of volunteer capacity. Right. So they're now starting to advertise so that somebody can call. If you were in Ogdensburg and you needed to go to Syracuse for the hospital or to Vermont and need a ride, they can start coordinating those things. But if somebody said, well, why do I want to support a nonprofit that's in Watertown? I said, well, their headquarters is, but the service here is in St. Lawrence County, and the person providing the service
and
lives
that's
here.
a really key piece, because if people don't understand that aspect of the service providers, then they're going to miss out on opportunities to support things that actually are helping and benefiting their own community.
For instance, Transitional Living Service is headquartered in Watertown. So if somebody just showed up today and started looking at TLS, they'd say, oh, that's a Watertown nonprofit. Actually, it started in Messina years and years ago, but it didn't morph to Watertown, but it's now centered in Watertown, and it's the largest city in the region, and there's other reasons for being there, but you know, this is something out of the nonprofit world. The nonprofits are all collaborating and working together and trying to ensure that we're increasing services. Big challenge though, because state and federal money is drying up. And
yeah, and apparently blowing away. Not just drying up, but it looks like in a lot of cases, we've just seen some of the numbers coming out of the Trump administration budget proposals, and they're going to directly affect a lot of care that has been traditionally provided to low-income people, seniors, kids. It's really looking pretty dire in many cases.
Well, you're gonna start seeing very specific stories. I saw one yesterday about PBS, and the Washington Post had a big picture of Big Bird, you know, that he's under attack again. The last time he was under attack, somebody said, well, actually, that program itself isn't dependent on.
No, they move.
They move, but that everybody likes to use Big Bird, and I always hate seeing don't use the wrong symbol, because then everybody walks away. But one that was mentioned just recently was Habitat for Humanity. So does that threaten Habitat for Humanity in St. Lawrence County? Well, I guarantee you the people at Habitat for Humanity who have been working, the volunteers are looking, and most of these local chapters are on shoestring budgets. They don't have a lot of money.
We're really good at doing a lot with almost nothing in the North Country, aren't we?
That's right. But like every nonprofit that has that's affiliated nationally, you want Habitat for Humanity to have that name. You want them connected to a national organization so that you know that they are following standards that have been established nationwide.
Right.
It's not 18 people in Potsdam and Canton got together and they're making it up as they go along. Once they have that name, they got to pay to have that name, in a sense. They've got to raise money. Nobody likes to talk about this, but some of the money for all these organizations, Boys and Girls Club, you name it, to be nationally affiliated, you have to send some money to the national office so it exists. And then it's setting standards and overseeing what you're doing so that the public knows that this is an organization that's legitimate and is following national standards. So if Habitat or whatever, I'm going to assume, is going to be sending some money, well, they got to generate that cash. You know, so maybe a shoestring budget, but to keep that name,
that's right,
that recognition. And so if the national office is under threat because they're losing their funding, they're going to start looking at the local chapters and say, hey, we don't exist if we don't get some more help here. So if you're in Canton or Potsdam and they say, okay, we need 1.5% of your budget to go to the national office, and it used to be 1.25%. Doesn't sound like much, but
it could be.
But it is, and so suddenly more money is actually going out of the community when you see something that says, well, what does it matter if a national organization is hurting? Well, the reality is it ends up affecting every chapter.
So let's talk a little bit. A lot of people are familiar with the United Way from the money-raising point of view and that, but you do more than just raise money for local charities. So talk a little bit about what the mission of the United Way is and some of the tools you use in your work.
Okay. Well, yeah, the United Way is best known historically for being an organization that connects, I always say connects industry businesses with the nonprofit world. So we raise most of our money through payroll deduction at a business, and if somebody wants to do that is a traditional standard and how we best do it, and then taking that money and with volunteers who oversee what we do, making funding decisions for nonprofits. We have 45 nonprofit partners in the North Country: Boys and Girls Clubs, Salvation Army. It's all the usual suspects. Catholic Charities, Renewal. Then we have the specific ones that are not a regional or national, like Renewal House.
Right, which is based here in Potsdam. Right.
CDP. So there's all those organizations that Garden Share just became a partner in the last 2 years. So they're all fitting the mission for the United Way, Salvation Army. Some are more obvious, but we're looking at income inequality. We're looking at education. We're looking at health. I could say those are the three ideas. I always say I'm looking at prevention, intervention, and crisis care. I'm looking at children, teens, families, and senior citizens.
Right.
So I'm looking to do programs that affect those distinct groups, but also in a holistic way. Because if you go to every one of these nonprofits, they're not all in their own lane of traffic. It may look that way from a public standpoint, but almost all of our nonprofits during the course of the day are referring somebody to somebody else, and they're all getting referrals. So if you go to the Boys and Girls Club in Ogdensburg or Messina, and a kid comes in with some issues that are beyond, I'm helping build, we're doing recreation and education here. Kid starts missing coming, or they don't want to go home,
right,
which is often the case. At that point, they're trained, not that they're going to they end up giving the care, but they're going to call other nonprofits. There might be food insecurity at home, there might be substance abuse, there might be domestic violence, the whole shooting match of things that could go wrong. That's not what the Boys and Girls Club does, but they're going to call those other nonprofits that provide those services and try to help that child and that family. So, we're trying to bring our network together to make sure that everybody is helping each other in those cases. Somebody comes home, if you go over to CDP here and they find out that your mother-in-law is illiterate and can't go to the grocery store and make healthy choices on food because she can't read the can, they're going to call literacy and try to address that. So, that's part of what we're doing.
Your safety net has many strands and a lot of
kind
of places where there's overlap of concern.
And so I'll have, somebody will call and say, I want to do this specific thing, but I'm always trying to plug that into a larger picture,
right,
because if somebody comes in and says, look, we just do our own thing here right off the bat, I say, we don't fund Lone Ranger programs. We're looking at how this interacts with the entire community. And so now, from some tools and things that we do, United Way nationally years ago started 211. So if I say 911, everybody knows what I'm talking about. 211 is you dial 211 right now, and somebody's going to pick up the phone and say, how can I help you? And they'll also look at your phone number and say, I see you're calling from Potsdam. And it's an information and a referral number. And so nationally, this is a number that every state's got it now. It's a United Way program that was started, and in most cases, state funding was put into it, United Way funding's been put into it, county government money often goes into it, and so people can call there and say, where's the food pantries, or I have a house, or I have a child with a developmental disability, or a problem that's occurring,
right, a crisis, part of the crisis
thing.
Yeah.
I need some help. Governments actually have jumped on there. So somebody says, well, where's the zoning office? What's is there a one-stop shopping thing for help?
So you can actually come into a brand new community, dial 211, and get connected to the people that you need to know about, but you don't know about because you're not part of that community.
Right. And so here in the North Country, it was unfortunate. I'll just say, circumstances are what they are. So in New York State, you could dial 211 in Buffalo, Long Island, and even Plattsburgh in 2007 and get somebody to answer. There were 10 counties in the center of the state that didn't have 211. So working with the governor, and we got some state money, the governor 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but we enacted it 2 years ago, said, I want those 10 counties to have 211. I want, and basically he was saying to the United Way, we got to get this done. Now, I'm in 3 counties where for me to go to a county government and say, hey, can I get some money for 211? And somebody would rightly say, well, what's your data show? What's the call volume going to be? I have no idea, but trust me, I'm with the United Way. That wasn't going to work. Syracuse, Onondaga County already had a similar system that their county government was funding. They were using 411. So I called in our network, Oswego, Onondaga, and our 3 counties decided to partner together. And so we did one contract as 5 counties with a company called Contact Community Services in Syracuse. And we began collecting all that data and putting it into their data bank, including a website, 211 CNY. So it says CNY, and if somebody says, well, that's Central New York, but the only way I could pull this off with our 3 counties was I had to go in with 5.
You had to partner.
We really did, and we didn't have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal if I had to go out and do my own contract for 3 counties with no government support locally, that wasn't going to happen. So we are slowly building up that call volume, and in the last year, 2 years, there's probably been 200 phone calls from this region. That's not a lot, but it keeps going up. And a lot of it is for, I need help on it's housing, rent assistance. That's the kind of calls people are making. What can I do? Now, a lot of those organizations and services are available, but until you have the crisis,
you don't know about them.
You don't know where to start.
Right.
And you don't always know which nonprofit provides that. You might think in Watertown, the Urban Mission has all the answers. You might think, oh.
But if you're sitting in a rural place, you're not going to necessarily think about calling something that has urban in its name, are you?
No. And so you can dial 211 or you can go online and look up the services. And that website, 211cny.com, allows you to actually, you can do a search by county, by service, and all that. When it first opened up, for instance, a lot of the suicide prevention hotlines were national organizations, and so I was going in there and saying, okay, we got to get reach out in there. We got to make sure all the local people that do those services are in there as well. The beauty of the 211 also is if you called and said, actually, I'm trying to find some services for Albuquerque, New Mexico. My mother lives in Albuquerque. Oh, well, let us transfer you.
Okay.
And the operators, we have agreements with state to state, so they can actually transfer you, even though you're calling.
So you don't even have to redial a number. You're just automatically put to the place you need to go.
And then the other thing we did was with the counties, if you called and say, I've got a problem, it's really a 911 problem, they would switch you to 911. The beauty of this, and where the county governments actually do like it, is so many people are calling 211 calling 911 for a 211 issue. 911 actually now can transfer you to 211, so that's not, I'm going to move you off the line. So you're not tying up either line inappropriately. And I won't, I can speak about Watertown a little bit easier. Jefferson County was having all this overtime, and so as a taxpayer you're going, that's horrible. But then when you talk to somebody at 911, you have somebody say, I didn't take a bathroom break for 8 hours. The phone never stopped ringing.
Right.
And nobody wants to walk away from that phone call that I had 15, there's a dog loose in the neighborhood calls. And then the next one is, there's somebody in my house.
Right.
You don't want to miss that one. So what's happened is in most communities that once it's established, the 911, the emergency people really like 211 because it takes off the unnecessary calls and they can move them. So that's one service. The other thing, and I think leading up to some of our conversation today, is about the Alice Project. And if you're our age and somebody says, "Oh, we're going to do Alice," and you're thinking, "Is that? Let's see,
Alice in Wonderland."
Jefferson Airplane. Okay, there's a White Rabbit. Oh, Arlo Guthrie wasn't Alice's Restaurant.
Right,
You know,
right.
So we're dating ourselves, but there we are. Anyway, the United Way nationally began the Alice Project, and Alice is an acronym for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So it's just a fancy term for the working poor.
Right.
I think there was an effort to sort of change the debate and the conversation about the working poor in our country, and so what the United Way was doing is a state-by-state study of economic conditions, and to try to change the debate to one of education. How many people really are in your community that are one crisis away from being
disaster,
in poverty?
Yes, from economic disaster.
And can we change the debate for those who aren't in poverty, who aren't in crisis, and have them look at this growing population with a little different level of respect? I mean, if I go out on Saturday night and somebody in her 30s is waiting on me, and she's charming, and I'm going to give her a tip and all that, and she may not have been home to tuck her kids in bed and read them a bedtime story. I mean, we need to start looking at all these people in this growing, burgeoning service industry who are asset limited and income constrained, but they're working. They're not lazy. They're not people who are on the dole wanting somebody to give them a handout. They actually want a job and they want to work, and they go to great efforts to do that, and sacrificing a lot of the things that we may have taken for granted when we were growing up, what our family structure was going to be.
Right, because we had jobs that had 9 to 5 type hours, and there were often union benefits, health care, all those things that went with the kind of jobs when,
Right.
our parents and we went through. And those jobs, for the most part, have a lot of them have disappeared, particularly in places like the North Country where we have a lot of low income, a lot of low wage jobs where that benefit structure no longer exists.
And when I got out of college in '74, and I took my first job, this was at a newspaper in South Carolina, and I was automatically in the pension system. Didn't even think about it. Didn't pay any attention to it. I started to about 20 years ago, but it wasn't something I was even thinking about. That subject isn't even coming up for most people.
That's right.
now. And I think the other thing, in talking about the North Country, it's not uncommon for somebody to be dismissive, not any more so here than anyplace else, but let's say, well, these are people who are working along the river, those are seasonal jobs, that's what they want to do. They got their job, they got a snowmobile, they've got their boat in the summer, they're happy as they can be, and they don't really want to work year-round, and that's who they are. Well, okay, but the whole region, everybody that's in poverty has actually got their life so figured out that they actually can exist on a seasonal job. That's not really everybody. That's not the whole community.
I remember having a conversation with a young woman at a restaurant down in Warren County. And we had gone to one of the museums down there, and we stopped, and it was late in the fall, and I said, what do you people do around here? And she says, as soon as the season dries up, everybody, they have to go on welfare because there are no jobs in the wintertime up here, or else they go south and they do more part-time work.
Yeah.
But that's their only choice because the economy just does not support year-round work. And this was not a young woman who didn't want to work, but she was going to be faced with that within about another 3 weeks because it was at the end of her season.
Well, and so what we have is some people that are describing poverty based on having seen one person years ago in line at a grocery store with food stamps buying, steak or whatever they were buying that was offensive because they shouldn't have the same things that I have. But I think what's happening is if people pay a little more attention to their neighbors, they're going to hear these other stories about what's going on. a lot of the, you and I have talked about this already or emailed about this, but what's happening in America is that we are economically segregating ourselves. And so we're not growing up, our kids certainly aren't growing up with people of different economic strata. Poor being with poor, and more people, if they can afford it, are moving to gated communities. And it's happening nationwide. So we're not actually seeing this person as a good person, and they're an auto mechanic, and that, I know all I do
We
is
don't have the same set of relationships. I think probably no place in America is that more true than in Congress. There are no poor people in Congress. They're all millionaires at the very least, some of them quite a bit more, and you can tell from the types of things that they say and the policies that they are promoting right now that they have no idea how real people live outside of their own little milieu. Talk to us a little bit, Bob, about the way the ALICE measure works, which is different from the federal poverty rate.
Yeah, so okay, the U.S. poverty level, $11,670 for a single person.
Boy, you're going to go a long way on that, aren't you?
Well, but that's the nationwide number that people throw out. So poverty is that number. What the ALICE project is trying to do and is doing is, and let's just talk about what we're doing in New York State. We created a county-by-county study, town-by-town, city-by-city study on not just poverty, but what we're calling the ALICE threshold. So by looking at housing costs, food costs, transportation costs in every community, we're coming up with a number and saying, if you're a single person, you got to generate this much income, not the poverty number, but this much income to afford all those basic necessities and maybe absorb that crisis when the car needs a major repair. So and maybe have if you're married with kids, or not, you have kids, that you would have something to enhance the educational experience of your child. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden we're talking, our St. Lawrence County one, which you've looked at. So we're saying that a single person in St. Lawrence County would have to have a job that generates $19,000 a year to afford all the necessities for what the cost of housing, food, health care, transportation. Two adults with a couple of kids, infant and a preschooler, now you're saying I want to work and pay for daycare and all that. You're now up to $57,000. Now it's double income, but still,
even so, some of those costs are absolutely fixed. And one of the things we know that is a problem everywhere, all across the country, is the lack of enough affordable, high-quality childcare. It just doesn't exist in the amount that it needs to, so that families are really put under a lot of pressure just trying to figure out how to do that so that they can work and be productive and meet those basic necessities. One of the things I really like about the ALICE project is that, and the way you've done it in New York State, is it gives you a snapshot of every single county so that you can get an idea about what the housing costs are and the child care costs and all those kinds of things. It really changes the conversation when you start talking about what does poverty look like, what is just barely making it look like, what does having enough to be successful look like. It gives you some real concrete information. And just a little bit about what's going on here in the North Country. In St. Lawrence County, using these figures, poverty is at 70%, the ALICE portion is at 35%. So you're talking about a total of 52% of people who are either not quite making it or just making it, or, as you say, one crisis away from having a problem. Jefferson County, the total is 46, in Franklin County it's 44, and in Lewis County it's 38. I think if we look at this map that was in your pocket, St. Lawrence County and Manhattan and the Bronx, and can't tell which county that is, south of Syracuse. Anyway, those are the worst counties in the whole state for this in terms
Highest.
of highest.
This is the, what we're saying is that percentage is below that Alice threshold.
Right.
So what we're saying is that in St. Lawrence County, it's 52% of the households in St. Lawrence County are below the Alice threshold and are basically a stressed and crisis situation.
Every day.
And every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
Now, some people move up, some people fall back and all that, but that's so in Jefferson County, when I was looking at the numbers, the city of Watertown the city itself is 57%, which wasn't too surprising because Watertown has a high rental market, and because it's the hub of all services in Jefferson County, anybody who's looking for services, bus transportation, and jobs, whatever, coming to Watertown is what you do.
Right.
Now, if you look at their Alice number, it's a higher threshold because rent is so much higher in Watertown than it is in St. Lawrence County. And that's the other thing I liked about this. When I was asked to provide input, I wanted to make sure that somebody in doing the study wouldn't say, well, it's the North, it's that swath of land, it's all the same, because it's not. Fort Drum is its own weather system.
Exactly.
And people need to understand that. And so they were very careful in going through adding all the Fort Drum data on what that does. I mean, we have base housing allowance for soldiers, and all the realtors and all the landlords, everybody can look up.
That's where you start.
That's where you can look it up online. And so when I'm talking to people in Alice, and that's common, we have actually people saying, I'm Alice, male and female, it's just, I'm Alice. And saying, gosh, my rent was $550, and when my lease was running out, they said, oh, it's now $900. And those are the kind of jumps in Watertown that you have.
Right.
You're not having those up here. I know when I was working at the newspaper, we would have openings in Watertown, and I could go higher, but we always would ask anybody in the company, and that's all of our newspapers in St. Lawrence or Lewis County, if anybody in the Canton office or the scene is interested in this job in Watertown, let us know. Never got one taker.
Because it was so much more expensive to live there?
Yeah, they were looking, my salary is not going to change enough. And that may sound odd, but reporters felt like they were making more money living in St. Lawrence County than living in Watertown. That was a real challenge. It's been a real challenge for our area.
Well, one of the things we know that poverty isn't just a family issue. When a large percentage of families are in poverty or in stress in an area, it has a negative impact on the larger community as well. So one of the places that's really easy to see that link is on education funding. If you live in an area with a lot of low property wealth, you're going to have less money being put into the education system for the students in that area because we don't have a state education funding system that directs dollars to places where there's really low property wealth, unfortunately. So what are the other impacts that you see that are kind of impacting the whole North Country because we have these high Alice rates and high poverty rates?
Well, what happens is there's just a drain on resources in every way. So you can only have so many golf tournaments, to support nonprofits. We have this little thing at the office where one of the people said, Amazon's got this great deal where people can buy a product on Amazon, and then they can designate, the United Way of Northern New York, and we get some money out of that. And I said, well, what would do me better is if everybody bought locally, and that if they did that, then that business would be there, because that guy running that business is much more likely to make a donation and contribution, not just to me, but to all the nonprofits, and our community's stronger. Because
the money stays in the community and it circulates through.
Yeah. And so the stress that's going on for nonprofits is financial, and it's also well, let's say commitment challenged, in that this generation that's growing up, I mean, I love social media when it's not antisocial, but you can be connected to the world and not know your neighbor now. And so what the stress that all the nonprofits are under is they want to have a board of directors. It's not just hiring staff. Somebody has to hire the staff, but they got to have competent people that care about that nonprofit, understand its mission, its role in the community, and are advocating for it to be successful. Every one of them, or every nonprofit in St. Lawrence County, in the region, you ask every director right now to be honest about their board of directors and say, where are you going to be in 5 years? They're all saying, I'm not sure. I'm scrambling to find the next generation of leadership. And so it's not just an economic doldrums, it's spiritual, emotional, intellectual kind of thing, as well as people not seeing and recognizing, you got to step up and be part of those nonprofits, because nonprofits don't exist in a vacuum. They don't. Somebody's got to, if they have grants, somebody's got to write that grant. Somebody's got to have a vision for the nonprofit. Somebody has to pay attention to federal and state regulations on what they have to do.
And understand the needs in the community and what that nonprofit does can best leverage the needs, because needs change throughout time in communities too. It's not a static situation.
And the other thing is, and you can look at the national economy the same way. I've always said, and I consider myself a businessman more than a philanthropist. I mean, hopefully business people become philanthropists, but you got to start somewhere. We need a vibrant economy to support our nonprofits. And I'll make one mention on the Alice. When these numbers start hitting 52% of households don't have enough money, we can't expect the rest of the community to keep supporting a growing number of people that need help. So from our elected leaders, I'm hoping they're looking at this saying, okay, we got to do something statewide. But getting back to business people, if the federal government told businesses, we're going to tax you, it's going up 1.5% next year, 2%, everybody would whine and complain. If you told them, but that's going to stay that level for the next 15 years or 10 years, they'd say, sign me up. It's not the fact that it went up, it's the fact of you don't know what's coming next. And every business are watching the government enact something in December, and here you've already planned your budget for the year. There's a lack, getting back to Congress, there's a lack of concern or interest or understanding of how what they do affects those businesses. Now, from a nonprofit level, we're seeing a lot of nonprofits that are becoming larger, and others that are falling behind, because there is, economies, I always look at them like a spiral staircase. They're hard to go up, but boy, you start falling, you go down fast. And if you don't have the brain power, manpower, financial muscle to have the right staff in place at the right times, things change on the state level, and you can get left behind. Here's a good example: is everybody that's in the substance abuse industry right now. I mean, they're not profits, but the substance abuse industry. They got told a couple of years ago, mental illness and substance abuse are connected, and you can't just treat people for a substance issue. You've got to treat them for their mental health issue. And so all of a sudden they're going, meaning if you want to keep getting funding, you've got to put in a mental health unit. Well, we got a mental health organization. Oh, you got to better figure it out. So all of a sudden, all the revenue streams coming out of the state government, every nonprofit is jumping around going, wait, I'm not in the right lane of traffic anymore. A nonprofit that's well known in the region, and they work with St. Lawrence County, is ACR Health. What was the original name of it?
Association of Retarded Persons, right? ARC?
No. This is AIDS.
ARC. Sorry.
AIDS, Yeah, that's an alphabet soup.
It is, and
I'm
apparently
glad
I failed.
you did it.
I failed the test.
I expect more out of the university women, by the way.
Well,
I'm
sorry.
Well, we make jokes about the alphabet soup all the time. So, AIDS Community Resource.
Oh, okay.
So everybody's heard of AIDS Community Resource, but they changed their name to Access, Care, and Resources for Health, because if they just kept that name AIDS, they weren't going to get any more money.
Okay. So they had to morph.
They needed to change their name. They were already, and they said our mission had already changed. But if we couldn't go to the state and say we're the AIDS Community Resource, and everybody's saying we're not just funding AIDS anymore. I don't want to make it sound like we got AIDS under control, but it certainly isn't the issue that it was 20 years ago. So you go to talk to ACR Health, and they'll say, well, actually, we've been working with people with hepatitis, diabetes. They are
a lot of long-term chronic health issues.
And they will say that people who are making bad choices with sexual relationships and their sexual health have also made bad choices on their health in general. So, you know, we have become experts on all these other things to recognize that whole goulash of health issues, and so their funding streams are have stayed intact, but they had to make a change. Jefferson County, the Alcohol and Substance Abuse Council of Jefferson County is now called Pivot. Pivot to Health is their full title, but they changed their name because alcohol and substance abuse couldn't stand on its own anymore because it's interconnected to other things. So the title would be a drawback for them as far as state funding goes. And so you're seeing that all over the place as everybody's saying, gosh, the model that we created 30 years ago that's been successful, the state's all of a sudden saying, sorry, you got to adjust to us. And now you've got to apply in a different way. And now you've got to do it in a different format. So all these nonprofits you can't be dumb to run a nonprofit.
Well, unfortunately, Bob, we are running out of time. So in the last couple minutes, what can people do to help now and to help create positive solutions that will, address some of these long-term problems that we have through organizations like yours?
Well, I do like people to think of the United Way and say, is that something that can help? I'll give you an example. Last year, Literacy in Northern New York closed its office in Potsdam. They weren't generating any money in support.
We actually did a North Country Matters on that last fall.
And so when it happened, I had people calling me saying, can you do something? Can you give them some money? And I said, and actually one said, you give them all this money in Jefferson County. I said, well, it's because I raise a lot of money in Jefferson County. So we go to school districts, and I mean, our fundraising, again, is payroll deduction, but we have a real hard time getting people to talk to us in St. Lawrence County. So I've got some great supporters, Corning, St. Lawrence University. It's not like nobody gives us any money. We'll award grants for $70,000, $80,000 this year, total. But we're doing several $100,000. So from a United Way standpoint, I am looking at these nonprofits and trying to help them. But I always tell people, yeah, I want you to support the United Way, but I want you to give me a little bit. Because if everybody does that, I'm fine. But find a nonprofit and be engaged with that nonprofit. And if, again, the next generation has got to get involved because we need board members and people who can. If you're just expecting an executive director to figure it out on their own, you're asking for failure. And more nonprofits are going to fail if they don't have more people supporting it.
Direct engagement.
Direct engagement. Yeah. And then people who are willing to say, how can we partner with others? And that may include not blowing up the nonprofit, but it may include changing the name, changing where the executive director lives, looking, saying, how can I ensure this service exists, even if the website change, they're looking at all the wrong things. The title of it and all these things and that. So we can all work together and do this because the service, ensuring the success and that the service is here is more important than who the executive director is, the name of it. And I love history and all that, but I mean, we got to look at the future.
That's right. Thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you.
in
Appreciate
today,
it very
Bob.
much.
This has been a great conversation. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, filmed here in the Potsdam Public Library's Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center. This show is a civic collaboration between the American Association of University Women of St. Lawrence County, the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County, and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's been a great
Appreciate it.
conversation.